Hello, this is Salvatore Vinciguerra. Welcome to this video on the Freedom Trail in Boston, Massachusetts. The Freedom Trail is marked with these golden medallions and these brick pavers on the sidewalks in downtown Boston, and it takes visitors to 16 different historical locations. This trail was developed in 1951, and it winds between the Boston Common to the Bunker Hill Monument in Charleston. Stops along the trail include simple explanatory ground markers, graveyards, notable churches and buildings, and some historical Navy frigate. While most of the sites are free of charge or suggest donations, the Old South Meeting House, the Old State House, and the Paul Revere House charge admission. The Freedom Trail is overseen by the City of Boston's Freedom Trail Commission and is supported in part by grants from various nonprofits and foundations, private philanthropy, and the Boston National Historic Park. I will have to admit that I could not do the entire 2.5-mile trail in one day, and that's not because I can't walk it. It's just because in order to really visit all of these historical sites, you need a lot of time to do that, and it took me about a week to do about 3/4 of it and visit all of the historical sites. In this video, I'm going to be starting with the northern part of the trail with the U.S.S. Constitution, Bunker Hill, and then making my way across the Charles River into downtown Boston. I would highly suggest to visitors that they break up their tour into different days and visit different historical sites, like focus on the north end and then focus on what's in downtown Boston and then maybe what's on the southern end of the trail, so that they don't get overwhelmed with trying to visit all 16 stops in one day. Also, if you want a more detailed look at some of these historic sites, please look in the description box below, as I have a whole playlist on my tour to Boston, Massachusetts. So I'm starting my journey on the Freedom Trail at the Boston Navy Yard, and this is one of the oldest shipbuilding facilities in the United States. The Navy Yard houses the U.S.S. Cass and Young and the U.S.S. Constitution, or Old Ironsides. The U.S.S. Constitution was built as one of the original 6 heavy frigates for the revived American Navy and the oldest warship still commissioned in the United States Navy and afloat in the world. There are 2 different museums in this area that have to do with naval history, and I highly suggest that you check their websites to make sure that they're open on the day that you go to visit this particular area. Even though the shipyard is open 24 hours a day and you can see some of these ships from the outside, I think it's better to visit on a day where the ships are open. So make sure you check out the websites, because the U.S.S. Constitution is a must-have for everyone. However, the U.S.S. Constitution is a very old ship, and it can be hard to navigate some of the stairs inside if you want to see some of the lower decks. It's a very cool piece of the United States naval history and a very important piece of American history. The U.S.S. Constitution and the museum that is run by the U.S. Navy is actually free of charge, so it's a great opportunity to see a part of history for free, even though they do ask for donations either when you go in or go out of these museums. And you do have another opportunity to make a donation if you want a great souvenir. The naval officers will fly a U.S. flag up on the Constitution, and then you get to keep it. And I forget if it's like $50 or $75 to keep that flag, but the money does go to helping to preserve the U.S.S. Constitution and the Boston Navy Yard. Personally, I could spend hours or half of a day just in the Navy Yard exploring all of these various ships and the museums. And I would highly suggest that if you really like naval history, to do so, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get to see the U.S.S. Constitution and some of the Navy memorabilia that they have on display. When you're done with the U.S.S. Constitution and the Boston Navy Yard, look for the path that either goes to the north end or that leads to Bunker Hill. And this is my little journey to Bunker Hill, and it passes through this really neat park. Actually, this park is called the Charleston Training Field or Winthrop Square, and it has some unique history with the Charleston Navy Yard and the surrounding area. And it's a very unique walk, as you can see, where you can see Bunker Hill as you're approaching it and walking up that hill on the Freedom Trail. And this was filmed in November of 2019, and you can see the various colors that they have here for fall in the trees, the pumpkins. They were getting ready for Thanksgiving, and it's just nice to see a Boston neighborhood like this as you're walking through it. So you may ask, what is the significance of Bunker Hill and the surrounding area? Well, on June 17, 1775, New England soldiers faced the British Army for the first time. And popularly known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, this bloody fighting took place throughout a hilly landscape of fenced pastures that were situated across the Charles River from Boston. Though the British forces claimed the field, the casualties inflicted by the provincial soldiers from Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Hampshire were staggering. Of the some 2,400 British soldiers and Marines engaged, some 1,000 were wounded or killed. 50 years after the battle, the Marquis de Lafitte set the cornerstone of what would become a lasting monument in tribute to the memory of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The project was ambitious. Construct a 221-foot obelisk built entirely from quarried granite. It took over 17 years to complete, but it still stands to this day atop the prominence of the battlefield known as Breed's Hill, marking the site where provincial forces constructed an earthen fort or redoubt prior to the battle. This site remains the focal point of the battle's memory. Don't forget to check out the Bunker Hill Museum. It's only a few feet away from the actual monument, and this is a great place to take refuge either on a very cold day or a very hot day, as this is heated or air conditioned and there are restrooms inside. So this is a great stopping point, especially if you're visiting other places on the Freedom Trail. And this is a great little museum that really has some very nice artifacts, and I like the way that it depicts this particular battle and the various history that surrounds it. As you saw earlier in the video, there was a fire truck, and it actually came from this fire department, which is engine number 50, and then this is St. Mary's Catholic Church. Here I'm trying to give you some perspective as you are walking right next to a very busy thoroughfare, and on the other side you do get to see these beautiful views of the Charles River. Across from that is then the North End, and that's where I'm heading next. This is the Copp's Hill Burying Ground and is named after shoemaker William Copp. This is the final resting place and burying ground of merchants, artisans, and craftspeople who lived in the North End. Some notable people buried in Copp's Hill are fire and brimstone preachers Cotton and Increase Mather, two Puritan ministers closely associated with the Salem witch trials, and Black Freemason founder Prince Hall. The burying ground also holds Old North Church sexton Robert Newman, the man who hung the lanterns on the night of Paul Revere's midnight ride, and Edmund Hart, builder of the U.S.S. Constitution. Countless free African Americans are buried in a potter's field on the Charter Street side of the site, and because of the burying ground's height and panoramic vistas, the British used this vantage point to train their cannons on Charlestown during the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. As you're visiting the burying ground, take a careful look at some of the headstones, as they're quite interesting to read and they have some very interesting artwork on them. Disease and the difficulty of childbirth sent many men, women, and children to an early grave in the colonial period in Boston. 7 smallpox epidemics had struck Boston by 1730. The 1721 outbreak infected over half of Boston's 11,000 population and left 850 dead. Almost a quarter of Boston's 17th century grave markers are for children below the age of 10. Losing a spouse to disease meant the remarriage was not only encouraged, but it was important to the survival of families. Headstone carvings designs often symbolize the omnipresence of death. And these carvings were used during the medieval period as a symbol of mortality and reflecting the Puritan religious influence. The winged skull, or death's head, is the most common headstone carving design in Boston's oldest burying grounds. Sometimes you will see a more cheerful side to these headstones. There is a winged face or cherub, and it's also called a soul effigy, and it is a common headstone carving in the mid-1700s. Popular after the American Revolution, the urn and the willow symbolizes both death and mourning. Urns are classical symbols of death because of their ancient use for holding ashes. Weeping willows, as the name implies, symbolize sorrow at the loss of a loved one. Wealthier Bostonians enthusiastically embraced gravestones which had designs such as a coat of arms on them, which symbolized their lineage and social status. In the 19th century, burying grounds were transformed into parks in Boston. Many families removed their ancestors to newer cemeteries, such as Mount Auburn and Forest Hills. At Copp's Hill in the 1830s, the cemetery department organized the gravestones into rows, installed pathways, steps, and walls, and built a small building which is not standing today. Older pictures of the burying ground from 1851 show Bostonians promenading through the burying ground. Additional changes were made in 1878, and today visitors can see portions of the Charlestown waterfront through the trees and the buildings. In some of these pictures, you can see the steeple of the Old North Church, and that's our next stop on the Freedom Trail. This is the Old North Church. It was established in 1723 as Christ Church in the city of Boston, and is both a National Historic Landmark operated by the Old North Foundation and an active Episcopal Church congregation. The Old North Church is the oldest church building and the longest-serving Episcopal congregation in the city of Boston. There's a lot to see at the Old North Church, and I would highly suggest that you pay the extra money to see the tour of the crypt, which is below the church, as well as the bell tower. Please look in the description box below, as I do have a video just focusing on the Old North Church and the influences of Paul Revere and his famous ride during the American Revolution. Only steps away from the Old North Church is the Ebenezer Clough House. This place is kind of hidden as you're walking down the Freedom Trail, but make sure that you look out for the signs that guide you into this house, as it's over 300 years old and it's located very near to the site of where Benjamin Franklin had his house, and it gives you some perspective as to what Benjamin Franklin's house would have looked like inside. On the day that I visited, I got to see a special exhibit on how chocolate was made in the 18th century in Boston, Massachusetts. As you come out of the Clough House and the Old North Church, you're going to see this beautiful statue of Paul Revere, and he's quite a theme and a big person in the city of Boston. Let's go take a look at his house. If you get hungry or thirsty while walking through the North End, this is a great place to have a cup of coffee while eating a pastry, or have lunch or dinner. Any one of the Italian restaurants in this area are absolutely amazing. The church in front of me while I'm walking is St. Stephen's Catholic Church, and there are actually 3 different historic Catholic churches in this neighborhood: the Sacred Heart, St. Leonard's, and St. Stephen's. And I would highly suggest that if the doors are open, take a peep inside. It'll only take a few minutes to take a tour of some of Boston's and the nation's oldest Catholic churches. In Boston, the streets are filled with living history, and you can even get a tour guide that dresses in costume of the 18th century. This is Paul Revere's house, and yes, you do have to pay a very small fee in order to go inside. Children are about $1, seniors and college students $5.50, and adults $6 at the time of this video. When you go inside Paul Revere's house, they do not want any photography whatsoever, so I only have one photograph, and then somebody told me to not take any more pictures, and so that's what I did. All of the furnishings inside, except for maybe one piece, are original to the house. So you really have to envision Paul Revere and his family living in this house, and I would highly suggest that you ask a lot of questions to the people that are inside of the house, as there's not a living history and you kind of have to know a lot about history in order to appreciate going inside of his house. This is the new museum that they have inside of this complex with Paul Revere's house, and they have a lot of the old artifacts of things that Paul Revere made. And yes, Paul Revere played an important part in the American Revolution, and he had many children, but he was also a silversmith, and so some of these items he made and were used in the surrounding areas of Boston. In fact, Paul Revere had a large variety of customers. There was often a misconception that he worked only for the wealthy. Although Revere made some large tea services for affluent persons, much of his work consisted of small sales to those of middle means. Paul Revere's shop made and sold over 1,000 personal items, including buckles and clasps, buttons, rings, and beads. Revere Silver Shop books also record 414 repairs, such as mending, cleaning, and polishing. In addition to making silver objects, Paul Revere's work as an engraver also played an important and lucrative role in his shop operations. At his customers' request, Revere engraved decorations on the silver, such as monograms or family crests, for which he charged extra. He also used this skill to engrave copper and other metals for printing. On a small printing press in his shop, Revere produced thousands of prints, such as money he engraved and printed for the Massachusetts government. He also printed and advertised pieces such as labels for clocks and hats, as well as illustrations for books, magazines, and newspapers. One of Paul Revere's most famous engravings is his depiction of the Boston Massacre of March of 1770, which we're going to be taking a closer look at when we get to Faneuil Hall and the State House as we continue our journey on the Freedom Trail. On your way out of the North End, don't forget to look out for this wonderful statue of Tony DeMarco, who recently passed away in October of 2021, and he was an American boxer and world welterweight champion. As you even get closer to the downtown Boston area, look up and down. The skyline of Boston is wonderful, and look down and look at the different streets and how narrow they are, especially in these passageways approaching the Oyster House here that we're about to enter, which is one of the oldest restaurants in the United States of America. Coming into view on the right-hand side are these 6 glass towers, and this is the Boston Holocaust Memorial, and it represents the 6 million people that were murdered in the Holocaust, and it's 1 million per tower. And as you enter each of these different towers, each one consists of 24 individual panels of glass. 22 of the panels are inscribed with 6 7-digit numbers, and 2 of the panels are inscribed with messages. I was getting hungry on the trail, and I wanted to taste some of Boston's famous seafood, which this is the best place, or one of the best places to get lobster and some other delectable items. This is the Union Oyster House. The Union Oyster House has the distinction of being America's oldest restaurant. The building itself dates back to the pre-revolutionary days, and it started serving food in 1826 and has continued ever since, even being one of John F. Kennedy's favorite places to eat. And if you go upstairs, you can see a special booth dedicated to the former United States President. The Quincy Market area, which is right in front of Faneuil Hall and the Old State House, is definitely one of the best places to be either day or night, and they have a lot of shopping and eateries right here in this one little area of downtown Boston. And even though it's a very cold day here in November in Boston, I still wanted to take my picture in front of this very famous statue of Samuel Adams and Faneuil Hall. And Samuel Adams was one of the founding fathers of the United States of America. Let's go inside of Faneuil Hall. It actually consists of 3 floors. This first floor is run by the National Park Service, and it includes a replica of the printing press that Paul Revere would have used during the Revolutionary period. There are also some gift shops on this level, and there are restrooms, which are sometimes hard to find on the Freedom Trail. The second floor of the building is where the Great Hall is located, and this is a beautiful place to visit either day or night, and it's actually open in the evening when I'm visiting right here. You are allowed to explore the entire hall except for maybe the second floor, but there is a National Park Service person right there, and you can ask them questions if you have them about the hall or what has happened in this hall or who's visited this hall, which consists of actually many dignitaries from the United States, around the world, and many U.S. presidents have actually spoken in this Great Hall area. Sometimes the National Park Service will actually give a little tour of the hall, so maybe ask them if they could do that for you while you're there, or there are also little placards around the room that you can read that show different historical things that have happened in the room, or maybe some historical artifacts within the room. And also in the back of this room, if you want to, there is a little picture book that shows what this hall and Faneuil Hall itself as a building looked like over the course of many years. This upper floor, which is the 3rd floor of the building, is actually open only on maybe certain hours of the day and certain days of the week. It's actually one of my favorite places to visit in Boston because it belongs to the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company, which is the oldest chartered military organization in the Western Hemisphere. This hall is really for military enthusiasts, and other people I can see would just like to go up here and walk around and get out of either the extreme hot or cold that could happen in Boston at different times of the year. So it's a good little resting place just to take a walk around inside somewhere and see some artifacts that are either military oriented or part of the history of Boston, because some of the paintings inside of this room are quite extraordinary. Boston certainly takes on a different look during the holidays, and this is what it looks like in the evening. If you get to visit at this time of the year, don't forget to check out the city calendar, where you get to see special tree lighting events and other special activities. The Old State House is the last stop for me on the Freedom Trail this visit to Boston, and I hope to come back and bring you another video with the other sites that I missed. The Old State House is the oldest surviving public building in Boston and was built in 1713 to house the government offices of the Massachusetts Bay Colony by the English government. Official proclamations were read from the Old State House balcony, including the Declaration of Independence on July 18, 1776. Beneath this balcony and in the intersection that I have pictures of is where the Boston Massacre took place on March 5, 1770, when a handful of British soldiers fired into a taunting crowd, killing 5 men. And today, a circle of paving stones marks the area of the massacre. Inside the Old State House is a gift shop, some restrooms, and yes, there is a museum, and you do have to pay to get inside. Inside the museum, you're going to see the old council chamber of the royal governor from the English government, and this is a replica of what it would have looked like inside of this building. There are lectures given throughout the day on the Boston Massacre and the history of the Old State House. Some of the treasures inside of the museum include John Hancock's red velvet coat, real tea from the Boston Tea Party, and Paul Revere's dramatic bloody massacre on King Street, a political cartoon that in 1770 sent tremors through the colonies and helped spark the American Revolution. If you would like some videos that go into a little bit more detail of some of the historical sites that I visited today, please don't forget to check out the description box below, or my main channel page, which has a whole playlist on my visit to Boston. This is Salvatore Vinciguerra. Thank you for watching this video on the Freedom Trail in Boston, Massachusetts. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe to this channel, and have a great day. Thank you.